Hello and welcome. If you're new here, thank you so much for joining. Before we get started, I have a serious question for you. How would you like to be part of the world's only 100% legal pyramid scheme? If that sounds like something you want to join, all you have to do is subscribe to my channel. Perks include boosting my self-esteem, a new totally rad video every week, joy from watching said totally rad video every week as many times as you want, and if you help somebody else join my pyramid scheme, you get the satisfaction of knowing you were the one to introduce them to this fantastic channel. If that sounds interesting to you, please join my totally legal pyramid scheme. Alright, with my shameless plug and the Crocs video out of the way, it's time to deliver on this video too. With all the publicity on our current election and everything going on with that, I thought it would be interesting to take a trip back to a fairly recent presidential election that was also surrounded in controversy that was ultimately settled by the Supreme Court. However, I don't think this current election will go quite that far. But who knows? Alright, with our intro out of the way, it's time to hop in our time machine and go back to the year 2000. These two dreamboats are running for president. If you want to avoid spoilers, skip to this time. Despite losing the popular vote, George W. Bush was elected the 43rd President of the United States. Now this election didn't go to the Supreme Court because of unsubstantiated claims of mass voter fraud. Instead, it was because the votes were so close in one state they couldn't definitively say that Bush won it. This is the 27th state to become part of the United States. It's sometimes called Florida. In 2000, Florida was home to 15.33 million people and a whole lot of gators. Now the reason the population is important is because it helps determine how many electoral votes a state gets. Florida had 25 votes in 2000. So with all that lame background stuff about Florida out of the way, let's talk about the results of the election. At the time of polls closing, Florida was originally called in favor of Al Gore. However, as the night went on, Bush started to get more and more votes. With about 85% of the votes counted and a lead of 100,000, Bush was declared winner of Florida and was awarded all of their 25 electoral votes along with all of their alligators. That still wasn't the end of all of this though, because most of the remaining votes were from heavily Democratic areas. After all of the remaining votes were counted, Bush's lead was only 300, or 0.00002% of Florida's population. The U.S. hit Control-Z, and Bush was undeclared winner of Florida, and a real mess was on their hands. The margin was so close that a mandatory recount was obviously required, and recount they did. In fact, they recounted so hard that the Supreme Court had to get involved. Eventually, the Supreme Court decided that Bush would be president. Okay, so far I've been talking a lot about electoral votes, Florida recounts, and a whole lot of gators. You know what I haven't talked about yet? Graphic design. Well, for that we need another brief flashback. Graphic design was invented in 1904 when William R. Graphic tried to design twice at the same time. Okay, that's not really true and also completely unnecessary. But anyway, back to Florida in the year 2000. Specifically, we're going to Palm Beach County, a little bit before the election. Because there was such a large amount of eligible presidential candidates, the ballot needed to be redesigned. Enter Teresa Lepore. As far as I can tell, she had no previous design experience, but that didn't stop her, and the final design shows. This was the resulting ballot, called the butterfly ballot. The candidates are printed on both sides of the ballot, and the voter punches the hole of their choice. Let's be real, this ballot is pretty confusing. In order to vote for Al Gore, one had to punch the third hole down. Florida law actually requires the two main candidates have to be next to each other, so this is kind of confusing. They were next to each other, but the holes weren't. The justification for this design was that Teresa wanted the candidates to be printed as large as possible because of the county's many old people. Now anyone who's ever had to help a boomer with computer stuff can imagine how well this design went. Now I'm in that weird area that's not quite Gen Z but not quite a millennial either, and I think even I would have issues with this ballot. By the way, if you're curious, I count myself as Gen Z. Now if I had been given the chance to design the ballot, I probably would have done very poorly too because I was only one at the time. But if I had the chance to design it now, I would do it quite a bit differently, and probably pretty good. First, and most obviously, I would get rid of the butterfly system. That's just a confusing nightmare for all. Next, I would be sure to pick a typeface that is very easy to read. As silly as it sounds, Comic Sans might not be a bad one to choose, and if you want to find out why, you can check out the video I did on it. The last thing I would change is I would get rid of the all caps. The reasons being, you can actually use a larger size font, and it is easier to read. People read not just by letters, but by word shape too. If you use all caps, it eliminates the shapes of the words and makes it harder to read, because the letters are all the same height. These are relatively simple fixes, but they would have probably made a big difference. Sadly, because I wasn't there to design the ballot for Palm Beach County, it's estimated somewhere around 2,800 ballots were mistakenly cast for Pat Buchanan instead of Al Gore. That's over 9 times the margin that Bush won Florida by. Now before you start speculating that the ballots were intentionally confusing to help the Republicans, you should know that Lepore was actually a registered Democrat. It seems she really was just trying to be helpful. Obviously people were more than a little bit peeved about all this. In fact, 10 years after the election, poor Teresa was still facing hostility. But I don't think all the blame should be placed on her. While those confusing ballots may have caused him to lose Florida, and ultimately the election, Al Gore actually won the popular vote of the entire US by over 500,000 votes. You could very easily argue that the Electoral College itself is to blame, but that's for a future video. It just goes to show how important good design actually is, even where it doesn't seem like it would matter. It also goes to show you that no, not everyone with a computer can do it. Basically, my entire point of this video is graphic design is too a good career path, Dad. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Join my 100% totally legal pyramid scheme.